When it comes to wrestlers who don't get the recognition they truly deserve, I feel Ron Simmons is a name that stands out. Ron's hard-hitting style would serve him well as both a babyface and heel in wrestling, and while more casual fans will remember him as a member of the APA, his time in WCW along with his Nation of Domination run were just as important. I've already covered the Nation on this channel and I will revisit the faction in greater detail, so in this video we're going to focus on Ron's time in WCW. While working in World Championship Wrestling, Ron was able to make history by becoming the first recognised African American World Heavyweight Champion in professional wrestling history, at least by the WWE and WCW at the time. Now, there were of course reported political reasons for this happening, but this is something I'm not going to discuss in this video. Ron Simmons' accomplishment here should never have any kind of asterisk beside it. The guy made history, and it's incredibly unfair to try and find an underlying reason for a career-defining and industry-shaking moment. Simmons would grow up to star as a linebacker on the Warner Robins high school football team. By 1977, he was one of the most highly touted recruits in the country. He chose Florida State, which was considered a huge recruiting victory for second-year head coach Bobby Bowden. In his first season, Simmons broke the single-season sack record, a record that stood for 19 years. The Seminoles were 39-8 during Simmons' years at the school, earning back-to-back Orange Bowl trips after Simmons' junior and senior seasons. Ron was a three-time All-American at Florida State, and his jersey number was eventually retired. Ron went on to play in the NFL, representing the Cleveland Browns in 1981 and 1982. From 1983 to 1985, he played for the USFL's Tampa Bay Bandits, playing alongside another man who would soon become a star in WCW, Lex Luger. After his incredible football career, Ron found himself working in community centres and he wanted to do voiceover work for radio and TV. But he said that Lex Luger approached him saying there was an opportunity, particularly for African Americans, to get into Jim Crockett Promotions. Lex said that Hiro Matsuda was trying to find the right black man to bring into the business and train to be a breakout star. At first, Ron had no interest. He was done with physical sports and wanted to find work that was less taxing on his body. In the end though, Lex talked Ron into meeting with Hiro, the same man who trained guys like Scott Hall, Cowboy Bob Orton and Hulk Hogan. Matsuda promised Ron he would make decent money in wrestling if he got through his training, and Ron was swayed into becoming a professional wrestler. The training was brutal, it was tough, but Ron stuck it out and gained respect from Matsuda. So Ron got his start in Florida Championship Wrestling in 1986, having a good run here with wins over competitors like the Sheepherders and Bad News Allen. Ron was popular early in his career, and along with his intense training from Hiro Matsuda, he became a standout star in the territory in no time at all, winning the NWA Florida Heavyweight Championship only 2 months into his career. While Ron would drop the belt 1 month later to Bad News Allen, it still speaks volumes that he was given the Florida Championship so early in his run. In mid-1987, Ron worked under the Jim Crockett Promotions banner, giving him the chance to work with stars such as Rick Steiner, Black Bart and Big Bubba Rogers. Working with these guys only made Ron an even better performer. While he was kept on the lower end of the cards, he was still given a ton of victories, and the fans got behind him too. He was quite popular early in his career. In the months that followed, Ron continued to score wins while portraying a babyface. He was part of the 1988 Crockett Cup, teaming with Steve Williams in a losing effort against the Varsity Club. Later in the year, Ron and Eddie Gilbert were defeated by the Fantastics at Clash of the Champions 4, a match that's very much worth a watch. In early 1989, around a fortnight after having a match with Ricky Steamboat, where it appeared Ron was becoming a rule breaker, Simmons became a bad guy when he turned on the Junkyard Dog, a move that gave Ron a slew of babyfaces to now work against. Ron would mainly work tags here, teaming up with Ranger Ross, Al Green and even the Iron Sheik for matches in the months that followed. Halloween Havoc 1989 though would be a memorable night for Ron, and a night that is remembered fondly by fans of old school WCW. Robin Green, portrayed by the late Nancy Benoit, was hanging around the Steiner brothers quite a lot. More so, she was hanging around Rick Steiner quite a lot, using the dog-faced gremlin for his wallet and taking advantage of the gullible Steiner brother. On top of this, Robin had caused the Steiners the NWA tag titles at Clash of the Champions 8 when she tripped Scott Steiner. In the end, Robin turned on the Steiners and adopted the name Woman. She was now out to get the Steiner brothers, and she would be introducing us to her new tag team at Halloween Havoc, a team that would face Rick and Scott at this pay-per-view. Ron Simmons teamed up here with Butch Reed to form Doom, an imposing tag team who went on to defeat the Steiners here at Halloween Havoc. Ron would joke later that all the fans knew that it was Ron Simmons under the mask. It wasn't really that hard to work out anyway, and he would still shout back at the fans that he wasn't Ron Simmons. Anyway, Doom are still pretty well remembered, and for good reason too. Both Ron and Butch were big tough guys, and their match here with the Steiner brothers showed how hard-hitting they could really be. Doom's push was halted quite early on. At Starrcade 1989, the pair lost every one of their Iron Team tournament matches, finishing 4th here in a poor showing. Woman ended up leaving Doom in favour of the Four Horsemen, and in February of 1990, Doom were forced to unmask after losing to the Steiner brothers. It seemed like Doom were destined to be another failed tag team, but when Teddy Long began managing Simmons and Reed, their push was reignited and the team ended up becoming quite successful. At Capital Combat 1990, Doom became the NWA World Tag Team Champions after defeating the Steiners in an excellent match. I feel this one was even better than their Halloween Havoc encounter. They went on to Starrcade 1990 to have a short but exciting street fight with Arn Anderson and Barry Windham. However, the match ended in a draw when members of each team were pinned at the same time. The team ended up losing the titles, now the WCW World Tag Team Championship, at Wrestle War 1991 to the Freebirds. This led to Doom breaking up, and naturally, a feud was kickstarted with now babyface Ron Simmons and a heel Butch Reed. Their cage match at the first Super Brawl was good, with Simmons getting the victory, helping to boost his status here as a possible main eventer. Ron, now with a fair amount of crowd support, was booked into a match against WCW Heavyweight Champion Lex Luger at Halloween Havoc 91. Their main event match here was a 2 out of 3 fall showdown that went nearly 20 minutes. Watch this match back and you will see that all the credit here has to go to Ron Simmons for making this kind of work. It seemed like Lex was totally blown up here, while Ron was determined to keep going and make something out of this match. Luger gets the win here, 2 falls to 1, and honestly I can't recommend this one at all. Simmons does work hard, but it takes 2 to make a great match, and Lex just wasn't there for this encounter. It's a shame too, this was Ron's first big shot at the gold on pay-per-view, and he had the crowd support, but all in all, it's a forgettable main event. After the Luger match and going into 1992, Ron won the WCW United States tag titles with Matt Bourne, or Big Josh as he was known here, when they defeated Steve Armstrong and Tracy Smothers on WCW Main Event. After dropping the titles weeks later to Terry Taylor and Greg Valentine, Ron was booked into a match with Cactus Jack at Super Brawl 2, a match that Simmons won and a match that you should check out. Simmons continued tagging with Matt Bourne in the weeks following Super Brawl 2 before easing himself into singles competition during the remainder of the year. Ron worked against the likes of Diamond Dallas Page, Mr. Hughes, Steve Austin and Vinny Vegas throughout mid-92, as it seemed he was now destined to remain in the WCW mid-card, but it all changed in August that year. As part of the Great American Bash Tour of 1992, Sting was scheduled to face WCW World Heavyweight Champion Big Van Vader when the house show loop stopped off in Baltimore. The match was cancelled when Jake Roberts, in storyline, injured the Stinger. It was decided then that a raffle would determine the number 1 contender, and as fate would have it, Ron Simmons won the raffle. So on August 2nd, 1992, Ron Simmons would face Big Van Vader for the WCW title. In subsequent interviews, Simmons claimed he had no idea what the plans were that night in Baltimore. He was not aware of the rework of the Sting Vader angle where Sting was to be injured by Jake Roberts. Nevertheless, as the show played out, Bill Watts announced that Simmons would challenge Vader for the world title. On this night, Ron Simmons defeated Vader and became the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. When he hits the power slam and gets the 1-2-3, the crowd reaction is absolutely crazy. It's one of the most goosebump inducing pops you will ever see in pro wrestling. This win meant a lot to the people in attendance and indeed people around the world. There are men crying in the audience. There are parents hugging their children. It's a moment in wrestling that everyone needs to see and feel. It's probably the most pure emotional fan reaction you will ever see in professional wrestling. Words just can't do it justice. Surprise title changes are always an exciting part of the business, but in this case it was a historic win because Simmons became the first recognised African American World Heavyweight Champion in the history of professional wrestling. On this historic title win, Ron Simmons said, "At that particular time, I didn't even focus on being the first African American champion. My only goal was to become world champion. That was the only thing on my mind, to have the opportunity to win the belt. As time went on, I started thinking of the significance of it, and it's more than I thought it would be. Even to this day, people tell me the impact it had on their life. I'll never experience that again. That's an emotion that I can't put into words, that you really only get once, unmatched by any feelings I've ever had." Now, I know people will bring this up in the comments, so I'm going to get it out of the way. Many say that Ron Simmons was not the first black world champion in wrestling. Bobo Brazil also blazed the trail for successful black athletes within the wrestling industry and won the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in 1962 from Buddy Rogers, except the NWA doesn't officially recognise the title switch, and thus we have controversy over this title win. On October 18th, 1962, Brazil defeated Nature Boy Buddy Rogers by hitting him in the groin, causing Rogers to be unable to continue. In a bizarre twist that blurs the line between real and kayfabe, Brazil refused the title because Rogers claimed to have suffered a groin injury during the match, and so Brazil felt his win was tainted. When Rogers' injury was later determined to be fake, Brazil accepted the title. Rogers would win the title back shortly thereafter, but the NWA refused to recognise a change had ever occurred. There was definitely something odd going on here, and depending on who you ask, the NWA's refusal to recognise Bobo as the champion was either due to the loss not being sanctioned by the NWA committee, or the NWA not wanting Brazil to be the first African American to hold their world title. Either way, whatever the case, Brazil was not formally or universally considered the first African American to win the World Heavyweight Championship, but you can see where the argument lies. Ron's title win would last only 5 months after he was defeated by Vader in a rematch. Before this, Ron continued to feud with Cactus Jack and had a title defense against Steve Williams at Starrcade 92, a decent match here with a poor finish. The match was initially ruled a double countout, but the decision was overturned and Ron won via DQ after Williams attacked him after the match. It was only 2 days later that Ron dropped the title to Vader. It's been said that Ron had problems with the WCW office, and he reportedly no-showed an event which caused him to get fined and ultimately forced to drop the title. Keep in mind, this was Observer reporting, so take from that what you will. There are videos out there with Ron Simmons talking about the politics in WCW at this time, however, and I recommend checking these out. Anyway, in the end, his title reign wasn't considered successful in terms of drawing power and television viewership. His final months in WCW saw him challenge Dustin Rhodes for the US title and Paul Orndorff for the TV title, but he was unsuccessful. His final matches in WCW saw him team up with Harlem Heat in matches against Too Cold Scorpio, Ice Train and Marcus Bagwell, and in September of 1994, Ron had his final WCW match where he defeated Scott Armstrong on a WCW Worldwide taping. Ron had been working on a per appearance basis, he did not renew his contract, and he left WCW to debut in Extreme Championship Wrestling. So all in all, even though Ron seemingly had some issues with the WCW office and the executives that walked in the door and walked back out, I think Ron's World Championship Wrestling run holds a high amount of significance. Of course, the world title win was historic. It paved the way for others to follow in his footsteps and become successful regardless of skin colour, but we should also remember that Ron didn't need a gimmick or character to be successful. We all know what would happen when Ron got to the WWF, and those who followed the man's career in WCW were in disbelief when Ron was given the Farouk Assad character, but in WCW, Ron was able to stand out by just being himself, a gifted and tough athlete. As the years went on though, Ron was able to display a more true side to himself during his WWE tenure, but that's a story for another time. While modern fans know Ron as the guy who shows up every now and then and says the word damn during backstage promos, the man deserves to be revered and respected as a true trailblazer and pioneer in the business. There's much more to Ron Simmons than a catchphrase. He's a person of extremely high relevance when it comes to black history and pro wrestling.